There are smart people in Washington who think that they're smart enough to run the world, and they are very intelligent people. But nobody's smart enough to run the lives of 310 million Americans. Nobody. And the smartest people I know are the people who know the policy, like the people you're going to hear from this evening, but have the humility to know that there's limits to knowledge. And so there's limits to government power. That I know that nobody's smart enough to run my life for me. I don't care. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, White House, doesn't matter. Nobody's that intelligent. That's the basic foundation of our republic, that we limit the power of government and the ability of people to run our lives because we recognize the limitations of human knowledge. So when you mix, as you do with our speakers tonight, strong knowledge of policy, but the humility to understand the limits of central planning and the limits of human knowledge, then I think you have something that you'll find very useful as you go out and express your views in the public square. Let's talk first about our first speaker. You're going to notice a theme with both of our speakers this evening, and that is that these are people who've actually done things. They've actually worked in the world of healthcare. I'm all for think tanks, and they both work for think tanks, and I used to work for one. But the kind of people I like in think tanks are the kind of people who actually did it out there first, and then went to think tanks so they could share the information and the knowledge that they got from the front lines. And certainly, Greg Scandlen is no exception to that. Greg Scandlen has worked with the baby blues. He's worked with the insurance companies. You know, that incredibly complex bureaucracy that you wrestle with when you're trying to get reimbursed for something? He knows it from the inside out, which means he knows what's wrong with it even more than we know. And he knows what's right with free market health care. And he knows how the system works. And what I really like about what Greg is going to say to us tonight is that he's focusing on evidence-based public policy. Not what we think will work, not what we hope will work, not change and putting it all at risk without looking at past experience, but what the hard, cold data tells us about reality. Winston Churchill says, facts are better than dreams. And Greg Scandlen is going to talk to us about the facts. What has worked and what hasn't worked, ideology aside, in the real world of healthcare. And I don't think there's anyone more equipped to speak to us about that. He's with Consumers for Healthcare Choices, which I believe he founded. Now it's associated with the Heartland Institute. He's been here before for a SEP meeting, and we're very pleased to have him back here once again. Greg Scandlen, please join us. Applause for Mr. Scandlen, please.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, thank you very much. I love coming to Pittsburgh, and this is just a terrific facility here. I get up here about once a year or so, and I think last time was just about a year ago. And I just love coming up here. And I was particularly pleased to see the Tea Party folks in the back of the room there. In January of this year, I made a wager with a colleague. I figured that health care would be passed by the start of the summer because here we had a young, dynamic, articulate president with overwhelming majorities in both houses of Congress. We had the special interest groups, so the AMA and the hospitals and the insurance industry is all gathering to get a seat at the table and cut deals, and I could see no points of opposition anywhere on the horizon, and I didn't see how it could be stopped, how this massive, gigantic healthcare reform proposal could be stopped, and I bet my colleague $50 that it would pass by the September. Well, the Red Cross is now $50 richer because I was wrong, and the reason I was wrong was because I didn't anticipate the rising of the American people. And this has been a breathtaking, breathtaking year for me. It has restored my faith in the people. What the Tea Party people have done is unprecedented in my experience. These are regular folks that got off their couches because they were concerned about what's happening to their country. And they got out in the streets and did things they've never done before. And they didn't want to do, but they felt compelled to do it. And I am just overwhelmed and humbled by what's been happening. And I hope we can keep it going, because without it, our country, I'm afraid, is in dire trouble. So thank you, and thank you for having me here tonight. I do want to talk about evidence-based public policy. You know, in Washington, all the politicians are scolding doctors because they're not following evidence-based medicine sufficiently, and they're saying, why aren't you following evidence-based medicine? They think that 30% of everything that's done in healthcare is waste, and it's all the doctor's fault because they're not following evidence-based medicine. But in fact, the politicians themselves failed to follow the evidence when it comes to public policy. And the track record is just grim. And I'm going to talk about some of that tonight. You may remember some of these things. In 1988, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis famously said that Massachusetts will now be the first state in the country to enact universal health insurance. And in fact, he ran for president on his success in creating universal health insurance in Massachusetts 20 years ago. The year after that, Oregon Governor Barbara Roberts passed similar legislation. Today, our dreams of providing effective and affordable health care to all Oregonians have come true. In 1992, Tennessee Governor Ned McWhirter said Tennessee will now cover at least 95% of its citizens. And Howard Dean, the famous Howard Dean, the same year said, in Vermont, this is an incredibly exciting moment that should make all Vermonters proud after Vermont passed its universal health coverage. Well, with all these states passing all these universal health programs, you would think that the problem would be largely solved. But in fact, all of these programs failed. They have all since been repealed because they were based on platitudes and hopes and empty promises instead of being based on reality. They are part of the track record of failed public policy in healthcare. Now this year, we have a whole bunch of new panaceas. As I mentioned, the president and Peter Orszag, particularly his director of the Office of Management and Budget, is totally convinced that 70% of all healthcare is waste. Not 70%, 30%. And that if we got rid of all that waste, we could save $700 billion a year. We could balance the budget and pay for all the reforms and have money left over because we would have $700 billion more a year for the government to spend. Now, they base that on a single study that was published in Health Affairs by the Dartmouth Atlas Project up in New Hampshire. And what Dartmouth did was they looked at the Medicare claims files of people at the end of life, the last 6 months of their life. And they saw that 10% of all of the geographic areas in the country don't spend very much money on those last 6 months of life. And they figured if the other 90% spent as little as the 10% did, that we could save $700 billion if we extrapolate that to the entire population. So they start with elderly people who are dying on Medicare and take that experience and say, now, if we did the same thing to the entire country, think how much money that we could save. And this is the level of analysis that goes into decision-making in Washington. It is frightening. But that is what they're trying to do.